Hello. In this video, I'd like to talk about 3 orchestration assignments, beginning with this one. It's an excerpt from Schubert. And the instrumentation is, we have 1 flute, 2 oboes, 2 clarinets in A, 2 bassoons, and 2 horns. 1 horn in F sharp and another horn in B. This is, by the way, horn in B basso. That means it will sound a minor ninth lower, the sound. And the sound of this one is a tritone, augmented fourth, or diminished fifth lower. And as we already know, the sound of clarinet in A is minor third lower. Let's focus on the piano part and make some thoughts about orchestration. If we look at the picture, only the picture, we will see 2 elements. We have a chordal structure here in the right hand, and then we have an accompaniment figure in the left hand. For now, forget about horns. We are going to talk about them later. Let's focus ourselves on the woodwind choir. Which instrument could play this accompaniment figure? There's only one instrument actually, and it is bassoon. Bassoon can play this figure. 1 bassoon or 2 bassoons, we can make the decision later on. And here we are going to use all 3 instrument groups. We have 2 clarinets, 2 oboes, and 1 flute. What the flute will play is pretty clear. It will play the uppermost line. Flute has to play the uppermost line. For the other instruments, we have 2 oboes, 2 clarinets. We have a couple of options. Let's zoom in a little bit. Only for the first chord. If you make the instrumentation of the first chord, then the rest is simple. We can keep the same orchestration because we have always 3 voices. We said that the uppermost line will be played by the flute. We have 2 options. Either we can give these tones to the oboe and these ones to the clarinet. This voicing will be overlapped. Overlapped. What is overlapped? F is overlapped, A is overlapped. Only this tone will be alone. This is one option. The other option would be, I'll show it in the next chord. This will be played by the flute. We can give this one for the oboe and at the same time for the clarinet. None of them is correct, none of them is incorrect. There's only a different effect in each of them. The first one will sound brighter. Brighter, why brighter? Because we have the 2 instruments here, and only 1 instrument in the middle register. This one will sound a little darker. Why darker? Because we have in the lower part more instruments now, and we have only 1 instrument in the top line. This is one thing, and another thing is, here in the second version, we will hear this A more clearly. The reason is that we have only 1 instrument here, flute, solo flute. We will perceive this voice as solo voice. And in this voice, we don't have any solo voice. Only this one, maybe, but because this is a low voice and this is a very neutral register for the clarinet, we won't perceive that line as melody, as solo line. And in the upper voices, we don't have any solo instrument. Each voice is doubled. Flute and oboe plays the uppermost voice. Oboe and clarinet play the middle voice, and only this one will be alone. That means we have to make the decision about what we want. Do we want this part, the uppermost part, to sound like a melody, like a solo melody? Then give this part for the flute and do not double it. Oboe, clarinet. If you want to get a homogeneous sound, if you want to hear the entire chord as a unity, as a chord without any particular solo voice, then double every voice as long as it's possible. Flute and oboe plays A, oboe and clarinet plays F, and only this one will play it by the clarinet alone. But it is not a problem because, as I said, it is in a very neutral register of the clarinet. Another option would be give it to the flute and double it with the clarinet. And this one oboe. In this case, we have two instruments here, and we have also two instruments for A. This F will be alone. This is not a good choice. This is not a good choice because this is a very characteristic register for the oboe, and it is not doubled. That means we are going to hear this voice, this F, particularly clear as a solo voice. In this case, it shouldn't happen because it is the middle voice. My suggestion would be make the chord homogeneous. Because it is clear in the writing, in the piano part, we are going to hear all of the voices at the same level without any particular emphasis on a particular chord. The uppermost one will sound as melody anyway. You don't have to do something special for it, but instrumentate the chord as homogeneous as possible would be my suggestion. So, flute, and then oboes, and clarinet here. So, if you have this plan, then the job is done actually. We can keep the instrumentation throughout the assignment. Let's take a look at the accompaniment part. We said we have all three instrument groups in the right hand. We have only the bassons here. If we give the entire line for one bassoon and let the other one, for example, to play only on the beats in order to support the bass line, this would be too weak because we have 5 instruments in the upper voice and only one bassoon here. It would be too weak. I would recommend that we take all 2 bassoons for this line as a duet, and I would make an addition here, an octave doubling. This is the first bassoon, then this is the second one. The notation has to change. This is first bassoon, and we have to have separate stems and beams for the second bassoon. So we have a stronger doubling and emphasis on the beat, and then we have enough volume for the rest of the figuration. So what should we write for the horns? The typical function of the horns is pedals. They are pedals of the orchestra. They have very smooth sound and they are not especially capable of playing rapid passages, so they are perfect for sustained tones. I would say, okay, let's write them sustained tones. We have F sharp minor harmony here. Then it changes somewhere. We have then B minor here in the second measure. We can change the pitches. F sharp minor. Let's pick some tones from F sharp minor and write them for the horns. Remember, this will sound augmented fourth or diminished fifth down, and this one will sound a minor ninth down. It is important that we stay in this register, in the accompaniment. Do not go into the bass register and do not go into the melody register. Another important part is we have a motion here beginning with A, and then we have an accompaniment figuration here until A. This will be our limitation. Because if you write this A, for example, also for the horn, then we destroy the clarity of the figuration. This line wouldn't sound as clear as it is now. We would blur the line. So avoid collisions. It is also true for the melody, for this part. Avoid collisions. Let's write F sharp and C sharp, for example, for the horns. And another thing is, instead of holding these tones in the horns, we can also make it longer. Instead of this, maybe it would be better to support this rhythmic idea. Ram pa ram pam pa ram. We can support it with rhythms ram pa, and continue this way. Let's make our instrumentation in a notation software. I'll take the upper line and give it to the flute, and then I'll take the entire line and then select the lower line, delete it, and do the same. I'll take only this lower two. So, and also dynamic for the flute. We are done with the instrumentation of the right hand, and this figuration, as we already talked about, and I'm going to copy it and make the octave transpositions. So, and of course the dynamic, never forget the dynamic. So, actually, we are done with the instrumentation. This is the instrumentation of the assignment of the given piano passage. We have two more instruments, horns. As I said, I would give them this missing register in the piano, and I would support the rhythmization. I want to hear F sharp and C sharp. Let's write F sharp for horn in F sharp. If the player plays C, then we are going to hear it F sharp. So, the first one, staccato, ram pa, and we can repeat it. We have also F sharp here. We can repeat it also in the second measure. And the dynamic could be forte or maybe master forte because it is just a pedal accompaniment, sustained tone. Let's do the same for our horn in B, but we want to hear C sharp, minor ninth higher. We have to write it minor ninth higher. If the hornist plays D natural, we are going to hear it C sharp here, C sharp 4. And here in the second measure, because the harmony is B minor, let's hear B natural. So that's all. This is the instrumentation of the passage. Let's have a listen. The second assignment I'd like to talk about is an excerpt from a sonata by Mozart. The instrumentation is we have 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, and the string section. There are multiple options, of course. There are particular things you should be careful about. I'm going to present my choice now. I would give this figuration to the strings. And also in this part, I would begin it with the strings, with cello and contrabass, and then beginning with this point as a contrast, I would give this line to the bassoon until that one. And here, strings, bassoon, and here once again, violins. Violins would take it over. And you see here a harmony in the low register. I would give it to the strings, to cello and viola in divisi, or cello in divisi, viola alone. And I would also double it with the woodwinds. You may ask, what about the collision here? We have a melodic line here. By the way, I would also double the melody beginning here between first and second violin entirely, because otherwise there would be too large the gap, a very large gap between 2 neighboring string parts. So, and I would give these sustained tones also to the woodwinds. You may ask, what about the collision? We have a melodic line here, doubled at 1 octave, and we have at the same register also some sustained notes. Because the colors are different, we have strings, melody in strings, and then sustained tone in woodwinds. Because of the different colors, it wouldn't be a problem. So this would be my preference, and I always recommend to do such a plan before the instrumentation. Not just take some figurations and write it here for the instruments. Make a plan. What do you want to do with your orchestration? And here, it is very important. Okay, let's say this is first and second violin in unison. They can begin with a rest, but it is highly important that they have a note on the beat. Do not begin with a rest on every beat. At the beginning, okay, one time it is okay, but after that we have to have, as I always say, we have to have a note on the beat. We don't have to double the bass, but it has to be a harmony tone. In this case, C would be the best choice, I think. So, ram, pa 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 pam, ratatatam, etc. So I said I begin with strings until that point, and here first bassoon and then the entire woodwind choir. Let's begin with the instrumentation in a notation software. As I said, I would give this line to the lower strings beginning with violoncello. I wouldn't double it with the double bass yet. Another thing is, it doesn't make sense to write the last note of the figuration as a 16th. I'll always avoid the unnecessary rests and write them as 8 notes with staccato. These two. And then I would double it with the viola, but you see those notes are too low. Transpose them 1 octave up. And then this line, I would give this line to the violin 1 and violin 2, also dynamic. As I said, we need always a note on the beat, a harmony note. C would be good. The same is true for the next beat. In the next measure we have B flat. I'm going to give this line to the lower strings, to the violoncello. This is too low, of course. I will transpose it 1 octave up, and I will also give it to the contrabass. But it would be good if we have a note on the downbeat in the first and second violin. I can also double this line with the viola 1 octave higher, but I don't want to do it because the music goes suddenly down here at this point. And I don't want to double it with viola in this register. I only want to hear the lower register. I'm going to delete it. And in the next beat, we have B flat, a dotted half note. B flat. And as I said, that was my plan. I want to give this line to the bassoon, beginning here. With slur and dynamic. And I wouldn't take both bassoons, I would only take the first one. And as I said, this line, I would give this line to the first violin, and I would double it with the second violin 1 octave lower where it is possible, in order to fill the gap between violin and viola. We have 2 options here. We have 3 notes, but we have only 2 string sections left. We have viola section and violoncello section. Either I'm going to give this A to the violoncello and C and E flat to the violas as divisi. But I think it would be better to give the lower line to the violoncellos as divisi and the upper line alone to the violas. There are 2 reasons why I think this is better. The first one is the violoncello section is much stronger than the viola section. So one violoncello against two violas would be a good balance. The other reason is that we have a kind of melodic motion here, E flat, F sharp. In contrast to the other voices which contain only sustained tones. So it would be good that we hear this melodic motion a little stronger, a little louder. So I'm going to give this notes to the violoncellos as divisi and this one alone to the viola. This is a very low register for the viola with slur, and here A and C. With tie. We can also support this A with double bass. And I'm going to give this harmony also to the wind instruments. But not in this order. I'm going to give this E flat to the oboe, F sharp, and then this sustained pitch too. And also for the bassoon, an F sharp here, F sharp and C. I chose this voicing because I have only two oboes and two bassoons. If I had flutes and clarinets, I would make another voicing, but in this case I cannot have a close voicing because if I take E flat and C, then I cannot write A for the bassoon, it would be too high. This is a nice voicing actually. I have a tritone here, A and E flat, and I have another tritone here. It is very symmetric. F sharp is not here in the chord, but it is here. It is a chord tone. We hear it in the melodic line. So I sustained it in the bassoon as a pedal effect. So I would say we are done with the instrumentation. Oh, I forget one thing. I forget to write divisi here. This is important. Let's have a listen. The last assignment I'd like to talk about is an excerpt from a Brahms Rhapsody. Before we start with the instrument, by the way, we have two flutes, two oboes, two clarinets in A, two bassoons, and then the entire string section. So this is a classical orchestra. Before we start with the instrumentation, we have to make some thoughts about the structure, about the music. We have a figuration here, and then we have another line here. And important part is, where is the bass line? Do we have bass line here? Actually not. We have a bass note here. It is about relativity. We have the lower tones on every second beat. Maybe also here and here. Here we will have to make an adjustment and maybe an octave transposition. Let's talk about the right hand first. Always consider the tempo. It is extremely fast. So it is not possible to begin with the rest. Never have rests on the beat, especially in such fast tempos. We will repeat this figuration also in the first half. And then this two. And this two. And so forth. So, and then another thing is the instrumentation. There are multiple options, of course, but I would separate these elements. I would give this line the right hand to the woodwinds and the lower part, the left hand, to the strings. This is my preference, my choice. I'm doing this because this is the melodic line, actually. B and C. We have the melodic line here, and it is doubled. This is like an echo in the higher register. After we hear it in the left hand, then we hear it 1/8 later in the right hand. So, and so on. It is blurred beginning with this part, but until that point it is clear. I would give this one to the strings and the other part to the woodwinds. Another thing we should consider is the voicing, of course. We said, or I said, I would give the right hand to the woodwinds in this dynamic. In this dynamic, the most important thing is that every instrument plays in its optimal register. For example, if I give this both notes to the flutes, the higher note would be okay, but the lower note beginning with this one, it would be too low and too weak for the flute. Flute cannot be effective in this register, cannot play forte. So this would be very good for the oboe, also for the clarinet. I would give this one to the flute. And then both of them to the flute. Flute, unison, and then flute separated. This is also okay. And what about the oboe? I would give this one to the oboe, but after that I wouldn't do this because this B is too high for the oboe. In the oboe, it is the opposite. In the higher register, oboe cannot play forte and cannot be effective. This is the optimal forte register for the oboe. Let's stay within this register and only double the flute part. That was the flute, 1 octave lower. This would be my oboe. Also here, oboe and then oboe. Here too, oboe. And here I would make a change and take both because this D would be not good. This is too low and the sound is not especially beautiful in this register. So let's stay within the stuff and give this. We changed, of course, from superimposed to the overlapped. This is superimposed voicing and this is overlapped voicing. Flute and oboe. D is overlapped. So this is the oboe. And what does the clarinet do? I would say I would also give this line to the clarinet because this is also an optimal register for the clarinet. I will double it entirely with the clarinet. Maybe only here. I will change to this note in the clarinet. I mean B and D for the clarinet. D is also not especially characteristic for the clarinet, not especially strong, not especially loud in the clarinet, this register, but it could be good to fill this space. But it is not a must. Of course, you can also continue doubling the oboe here. So, and we are going to talk about this part. Let's talk about strings, the voicing of the strings. The important thing is to separate the bass line, D sharp. Give this one to the violoncello and to the double bass. This one too. This one. And this is a difficult problem. We are going to talk about it while instrumenting, and then another bass line. So separate it, and then we can give the rest to the strings. Because we have already F sharp here, we can let this F sharp that would make this texture more clear. Otherwise, we have too many notes in this register here. Viola, violin 2 and violin 1. And here too, viola, violin 2, violin 1, etc. And here we have to write it, of course, 1 or maybe 2 octaves higher, as low as possible for the strings. And here, if we move all the wind instruments to this register, then it wouldn't be good because the instruments wouldn't sound well in this register, especially flute. Flute would sound very quiet and very neutral, and oboe would sound very hard and disturbing. And clarinet is also very uncharacteristic here. We cannot transfer every musical idea in the piano part to the orchestra. This is unfortunately not possible. We are going to try to give this sense of going lower, which is the idea in the piano part. We are going to try it with the strings. We will go as low as possible and try to give this feeling in the strings. And we will leave the woodwinds in their best registers because the dynamic is still fortissimo. If the dynamic would have gone lower, quieter, then it would be an option maybe. Maybe only clarinets and bassoon in this register without having the other instruments, but because the dynamic is still fortissimo, we have to keep also the other instruments. So I think we are done with our planning. We can move to a notation software. Let's start with the instrumentation. It is a difficult instrumentation. It won't be always possible to take the notes and give directly to the instruments. At some points we have to find other solutions. I'm going to make the instrumentation until that point for now, because we will have some problems in the last 2 beats. Let's start with this part. I will take the upper line, only the upper line, and give it to the first violin. And I will delete the last 2. And then I will distribute the chords to the strings, beginning with the second violin, B, C, E sharp. But the problem is we don't have E sharp in the violin, so I'm going to transpose it 1 octave higher. Then I will change the voice, but because I don't want to have any voice crossing, I will give this B, I will make this B E sharp. And then for the second violin, it begins with B and C natural. And here B again. And then viola, in the viola we have A, G and D. Let's write it. A, G and D. And then the bass line. D sharp, E and G sharp. D sharp, E and G sharp. And I will give this line also to the double bass one octave lower, and the entire thing will be staccato. Before we move on, I'd like to mention a problem. We have only one E sharp here in the only in the first violin section. And then we have the entire string section. In this case, this E sharp would be too quiet. Two less instruments playing this note. I'm going to give it also to the instruments, they can play this note. And then also this one. And also this one. And the dynamic, we shouldn't forget the dynamic. It is fortissimo. And this one. Now, we are going to instrumentate the last two beats for the strings as low as possible. We can give this E sharp to the violoncello and contrabass, and then we have an F sharp major chord. Let's try it. I will give this E sharp to the violoncello, and then actually I can also write C sharp, but in this case the double bass would stay alone. So I give F sharp. And if I also give the same line, E sharp and F sharp, double bass can play it, but in this case I have no differentiation between E sharp and F sharp. But in the piano part we see the same situation. We have one tone and then a bass note. And also here we have, although it is in the bass register, we have one single tone and then the bass tone is lower. So I would recommend to give this note to the cello, only the cello, without double bass, and support it with the viola. It is not possible in the same register, of course, one octave higher. What we did here, we are doing the same thing, only one octave higher, we are octave doubling in order to make it stronger. And then at the end, F sharp, we need an A sharp and a C sharp. We can give C sharp to the viola, and we can give A sharp to the second violin, and C sharp, A sharp. Instead of C sharp here, instead of doubling the fifth, I would give the F sharp to the first violin. So I think we are done with the strings, and we can work with the woodwinds. I start with E sharp, and then F sharp. This is the first flute, and then B, C natural, A sharp, B natural. I will skip this part for now, and change to the second voice. Also, it begins with E sharp, and then we hear B, and then double in unison, and then G, A sharp, of course, also A sharp, and here D. The entire thing is staccato and in fortissimo dynamic. And the oboe, as we talked about, it begins also with E sharp. I will copy this line and paste it one octave lower. So that was the oboe part, except this one. Here I recommended a change to overlapped voicing. And I would give the same line to the clarinet, maybe except the last one. So, also overlapped B. This will sound B. This is clarinet in A. So it sounds B. This is an overlapped voicing. And I like to use the bassoons as bridge instruments between both sections. I'd like to give the bass line to the bassoon and also this melody line. Maybe one feature of the melodic line which we couldn't reflect in our instrumentation here. This one, E sharp, F sharp, B, C, A sharp, B, and then E sharp, F. We can give this line clearly to the first bassoon. A staccato beginning with here. This is the register is high, of course, but it will go into a normal register very soon. A sharp, B, E sharp, and F. And then I would give the bass notes here to the second bassoon. It begins with D sharp, and then here E and G sharp, and here F. Maybe also here the E sharp, in order to support the violoncello, because we have only two groups here. Maybe it would be good, maybe not. Maybe this one is better. So, and the dynamic, fortissimo, and the entire passage is staccato. So what we are going to do with this section, this is, as I said, this is too low. I would say let's ignore the register. Let's ignore the register and continue with our continue staying in the ideal register, E sharp and F sharp. And also the second one begins with E sharp and doubles the C sharp. At the oboe, we can use the oboe in this register, but I'm going to double it in octaves. This is the first oboe. Now the second oboe, one octave lower, and then here A sharp. And the clarinet, I will write almost the same line for the clarinet. This part. One octave lower, clarinet can play it. I admit this is not especially effective in this register. So, but it is okay. It is, I want to have this dark color too, although it is not going to be especially strong. And after that here, I'd like to have F sharp. I'd like to have F sharp and C. C sharp. And this would be my instrumentation, but I will give this line also to the basso. So let's have a listen. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video.